Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
If I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Thursday, March 26th, 2026. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Andrew Arsan of the University of Cambridge joins us to talk about his piece in Equator, Tearing Up the Map, Netanyahu's War to Remake the Middle East. And later in the show, Ed Zitron back with us to talk about AI data centers and how the industry is overstating how far along they are. Tech would never do that. Also on the program, Trump's military briefings on the Iran war apparently begin with 2-minute montages with big explosions for Boss Baby. Meanwhile, Iran has hardened their demands, and 1,000 U.S. soldiers with the Army's 82nd Airborne Division are prepared to deploy to the Middle East in a few days. Iran is worried that renewed peace talks are another ruse to lull them into a false sense of security. Because, of course, why would they not be worried about that?
That's been what's happened the last dozen times.
Nancy Mace publicly breaks from her party and says she'll likely vote for the Democrats' War Powers resolution. But many believe that Democratic leadership is dragging their feet on this. We'll talk about that in just a second. The top Republican on the House Armed Services Committee apparently is getting a little queasy about troop movements. The DHS funding lapse is severely hitting airports, leading to the highest wait times in the history of TSA, as unpaid officers cause a staffing crunch. The UN votes 123-3 to condemn the transatlantic slave trade. The 3 no votes are the US, Israel, and Argentina. So I like to call that the axis of Epstein and the Nazi haven. If you want to see these jokes before I make them on the show, follow me on social media. A new Emerson poll shows Graham Plattner leading Janet Mills by over 20 points and Susan Collins by 7. Trump's DOJ to settle with Michael Flynn, another taxpayer-funded payout to a MAGA lunatic. Mikey Sherrill signed a trio of pro-immigrant bills in New Jersey, including one barring local police cooperation with ICE, which I'm very happy to hear about. They were on Phil Murphy's desk, and he did not do so. The White House is delaying its nomination for a permanent CDC director, keeping that anti-vaxxer, anti-masker Bhattacharya as its acting one. And lastly, Florida's Attorney General warns that the NFL's coaching diversity rule, the Rooney Rule, violates civil rights laws. To say you have to interview one black person.
Yeah, it's racist against white coaches.
Duh! All this and more on today's Majority Report. Hello, everybody. It is an Majority Report Thursday. I am back, and once again, the camera is just doing amazing stuff this morning here on the show. Does it look as bad as it looks on my monitor?
Not as bad, no.
Okay, good. But either way, I am back. Had a nice little jaunt out to California. If people want to check out the recorded live show of The Bituation Room with myself and Francesca Fiorentina, you can become a patron. It was really fun. We had Van Lathan, Ida Rodriguez as the other guests, and Van kind of stole the show and was making people laugh in the crowd. Everyone had a really good time. We did this little pageant segment with some of the local DSA candidates in LA. That was pretty great. Camera's still acting up. All right. Do we need to?
No, it'll sort itself out.
Okay. All right. It's just lovely to return right back to my favorite parts of the show, the tech issues.
What's the definition of insanity?
And the visuals. So NBC News is reporting that at the beginning of the briefings on the Iran war, the U.S. military officials that are responsible for briefing Trump show him a 2-minute video montage of the biggest big booms and explosions in Iran.
Any word if that's a vertical orientation or if that's a standard 1080p format?
They've got they do one for the toilet, one for the Situation Room.
It's on TikTok. I'm scrolling.
Meanwhile, 1,000 soldiers with the Army's 82nd Airborne are heading to the Middle East in coming days. Now, this unit was also sent after Trump assassinated Soleimani. They're a rapid response unit. So this in and of itself doesn't mean that a ground invasion is inevitable, but you're also seeing signs from the Republicans in the House that are getting a little bit freaked out about troop movements, which is more of an indication to me than the public deployments. Iran is also now admitting, yes, okay, we're talking to the U.S., peace talks are ongoing, but they also are warning mediators that peace talks might be another ruse for the negotiators to be assassinated. It's been a long-standing practice by the Israelis that they will target the more reasonable mediators in these instances.
Trump alluded to not wanting to say who they're talking to because we've killed a bunch of their top people.
Yeah. It basically admitting that if we admit who's reasonable here, Israel might kill them.
Like they've done throughout this Middle East conflict in the past couple of years.
Right. So you also in the House have Axios is reporting that Democrats think that they have the votes on the War Powers Resolution, which could finally restrict Trump, the Mad King, waging this criminal war of choice. Mike Johnson can only afford one Republican defection, and Nancy Mace is already saying that she's going to support this. Plus, you have some kind of similar, freakouts by some Republicans, or they're getting queasy about this because, this is absolute insanity. You have the New York Times reporting that Iran's attacks on the U.S. bases have been so successful that the 13 bases in the region are largely uninhabitable at this point because, and so U.S. personnel has had to move to hotels and other civilian areas to do their work. So that's also probably how they're selling this ground invasion to members of Congress, although we'll play this clip of Trump in a second. He doesn't really feel he needs to use Congress here because we can't even really station our troops in the traditional way that we would because they've been rendered uninhabitable. So how do we get a troop presence around Iran if we can't be around there? Might as well be in Iran. So here's Trump yesterday, I believe, talking about how he's going to break the law.
But they're doing it for two reasons. Number one is they want to deflect from all of the tremendous success that we're having in this military operation. I won't use the word war because they say if you use the word war, that's maybe not a good thing to do. They don't like the word war because you're supposed to get approval. So I'll use the word military operation, which is really what it is. It's called a military decimation. Convincing. But they don't like the good publicity. They don't like to see us succeed. They want to see our country fail.
So just basically admitting, hey, I'm violating the Constitution. I can't call it a war because that would be illegal. So it's not a war. Trust me on this.
How has his staff not figured out that he's going to say everything they say to him?
Well, there's
got to be a better way to deliver that news to him.
There are no, we're at like base level here. We're at base level. It's just like, don't incriminate yourself publicly, but we have to give you the broad contours of how we're trying to avoid the fact that Congress is supposed to be the body that declares war. And like this war powers fight, Ryan Grimm's been on top of this. I've been seeing some other reporters. I think it was like Ida Chavez, I believe, covering this on Twitter. But these Democrats are potentially dragging out this vote on the war powers resolution. They have the votes, apparently. The last 4 defectors are going to vote with the rest of the caucus. So they're whipping votes to a degree because they know how unpopular this is. That's Henry Cuellar, that's Jared Golden, Greg Landsman, and Juan Vargas. And it seems like they're going to be whipped into shape, but there are Democrats who feel, and this is incredibly cynical, that this could be a win for them. That they can oppose this war with a vote at this point and keep the caucus together potentially. But they can drag it on a little bit because, one, it hurts Trump, which they do care about. But perhaps more importantly, they can have it both ways with the Israel lobby, that across the AIPAC and the more liberal Zionist factions, they've been wanting war with Iran this entire time. You have the liberal centrist opposition leader in Israel endorsing the greater Israel idea. So this is like a genuinely... It's a project that Israel hawks have wanted for quite a while. So if you can delay this war powers vote, which they have until Friday, and then there's a multi-week recess, and then the earliest that they can vote on this war powers resolution to stop this criminal war of choice in Iran would be April 13th or something like that. April 11th, April 13th, around there. It seems like Hakeem Jeffries and Gregory Meeks might be trying to do that kind of two-step there. Which is unconscionable.
I mean, it makes you wonder how upset they really were that Kamala Harris lost the election last time. If they're willing to play this kind of game to say, okay, we can kind of slow walk our resistance to this war, make it on procedural grounds, and let Trump be responsible for it, and we can posture. I mean, similar to kind of the Iraq War, where. Of course, a lot of Democrats were against it, but belatedly, and a lot of them at the top were for it.
Here's Trump's this morning, basically saying that Iran is begging him to make a deal. That is not the case, but he's trying to look tough, even as gas prices explode. Like, there was another story I didn't even get to headline this morning. The USPS is going to start charging surcharges for the first time ever on some of these packages because the fuel prices are so insane. Just talk to any... I was talking to my Lyft driver in LA. Like, you see $6 a gallon. This is going to really impact everyone across the economy right now. $4 is the national average at this point. Here is Trump talking about how we're actually winning this thing.
Set the record straight because I've been watching the Wall Street Journal's fake news and all these stories that get printed like, oh, I want to make a deal. They are begging to make a deal, not me. They're begging to make a deal. And anybody that saw what was happening over there would understand why they want to make a deal. But they say, oh, we're not talking to them. Anybody would know that. And only a total fool. And they're not fools. They're very smart, actually, in a certain way.
I like how he's
surprised.
surprised.
Great negotiators. I say they're lousy fighters, but they're great negotiators. And they are begging to work out a deal. I don't know if we'll be able to do that. I don't know if we're willing to do that. They should have done that 4 weeks ago. They should have done it 2 years ago. Or they should have done it when we first came into office, because 2 years ago they had free reign under Biden. Sleepy Joe, worst president in the history of our country.
Okay. So as I just mentioned, Iran, which is not the global superpower that the United States is, specifically militarily, has essentially decimated every U.S. military base, save for a handful in and around the GCC states. And U.S. forces are being forced to work out of hotels. But apparently...
Is that safe for the other people in those hotels?
Well, human shields,
yeah.
the Israelification of everything. I mean, let's just be real. That like we're bombing schools like our colony in the Middle East does. These are just kind of the normalization of the tactics that we normally outsource to our subcontractor in the Middle East. The largest aircraft carrier in the Middle East, as I believe Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State fondly referred to Israel. Iran is able to win this war of attrition. It's just going to be a question of what head on a spike Trump can get so that he can claim this is some sort of rhetorical victory. You keep seeing that the timeline for this war keeps getting pushed back. Now
Dave Rubin said about 2 more weeks.
Oh, cool. Well,
week.
the Wall Street Journal says now mid-May is the new deadline because Trump wants this over before his meeting with Xi Jinping and summit with him.
That's about 6 weeks. Okay, I guess Dave Rubin might be a little bit off, so we want to check that. I just want to make one comment on 3,000 or so troops being sailed over there at great expense to the American taxpayer. And Representative Ryan McKenzie, a Republican out of Pennsylvania, a vulnerable incumbent, this is from Politico, Republican up for re-election, said he's wary of ground troops, but he expressed hope that the latest Middle East deployment is a tactic by Trump meant to force the Iranian regime to the bargaining table. Is it good when you're in the middle of a war and members of your own party say, yeah, I hope he's just bluffing? I hope this is just a bluff that's happening right now. Does that undermine maybe like even the strategy you're taking? Like this is a complete clusterfuck.
Yep, exactly right. In a moment, we'll be talking a bit more about what the implications are for the map of the Middle East with our guest, Alex Arsan. But first, a word from one of our sponsors. This episode is sponsored by Liquid IV. It's really important to stay hydrated, especially as we're getting into springtime. You don't know how the seasons are going to affect your hydration, but I also like to use Liquid IV when I'm traveling. You got the science-backed Live formula that helps you trust that you are staying hydrated, and it's very tasty as well. This spring, we're looking forward to longer sun-drenched days, and that means we need better hydration to keep us hydrated with Liquid IV's mix of electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients. And right now, you get 20% off your first order with code MAJORITYREP at checkout. I love Liquid IV. Sam is a daily drinker of it. I'm basically a daily drinker of it. I love the acai. I love the strawberry. I love the fruitier flavors. But you can also, there's like lemon lime. There's a bunch of different flavors. And you don't have to worry about some of those other drinks that promote hydration but have all of those chemicals and stuff in it. Just 1 stick and 16 ounces of water hydrates faster than water alone. Powered by Live Hydroscience, an optimized ratio of electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients that turn ordinary water into extraordinary hydration, Liquid IV is a science-backed hydration you can trust. Tear, pour, live more. Go to liquidiv.com and get 20% off your first purchase with code MAJORITYREP at checkout. That's 20% off your first purchase with code MAJORITYREP at liquidiv.com. Link down below in the video and episode descriptions and at majority.fm. Go to liquidiv.com and use code MAJORITYREP at checkout for 20% off your first order. Quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking to Andrew Arsan. We are back, and we are joined now by Andrew Arsan, professor of Arab and Global History at the University of Cambridge, whose latest piece in Equator is entitled Tearing Up the Map, Netanyahu's War to Remake the Middle East. Andrew, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Emma. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Of course. So the Equator is a new magazine. People should really check it out. Doing some great work over there. You write that the Middle East is never going to look the same after this. Let's just start from a broad strokes perspective, if you could expand on that.
Yeah, I mean, first things first, just a little shout out to the good folks at Equator. As you said, it's a new publication, online publication. Some wonderful editors, Jonathan Shainin, who used to work at The Guardian, a bunch of other great people like Ratik Asokan, who worked on this piece. And they're trying to give a kind of decolonial alternative to, publications like the New York Review, the London Review of Books. really spotlight voices from the global south and experiences from the global south from places like the Middle East, sub-Saharan Africa. So you're asking about the Middle East and how it'll change. Broad strokes, I mean, not to sound like a policy wonk, this is an incredibly fluid situation that's changing day by day. But I think if you look at the public statements that are coming out of Israeli officials in particular, there is a very clear ambition to redraw the map of the region and to try to assert Israel's regional hegemony, not just vis-a-vis Iran, but also when it comes to relations with the Gulf states, the GCC states, and also Israel's immediate neighborhood, immediate vicinity, states like Lebanon and like Syria that border Israel.
Let's talk about Lebanon. There's been just absolute carnage there. Israel appears to be setting up some sort of prolonged occupation, specifically in the areas south of the Litani River. Your piece goes into the history of, U.S. policy of dividing the region. Perhaps you can talk about that present situation and put it in the context of your piece as well.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly is the fear that Israel is returning to the occupation of South Lebanon. Of course, it occupied much of that region between the 70s, 80s, and 2000. And, Israeli officials have been very explicit in their desire to push far into Lebanese territory, 30 kilometers from the Israeli border, from the ceasefire line, all the way up to the Litani River. Ground operations are ongoing at the moment. They're trying to push closer into areas very close to the Litani River. So there's a very long history of this, of trying to create a kind of buffer zone in South Lebanon, trying to empty the region of its population and of what Israel sees as threats to its security. First the PLO and other Palestinian organizations in the 70s and 80s. Then from the 80s onwards, Hezbollah and other kind of elements of the Islamic resistance. To put it in a regional context, I think there has been I think this war very much shows the kind of attempt to frame this in a regional context and to try to break the power of the so-called axis of resistance that emerged from the 2000s onwards, centered on Tehran, but with obviously with branches in Gaza, in Lebanon, and also up till 2024 in Syria, in the Assad regime.
Let's go back to the 1970s and the 1973 oil shock, which is where your piece kind of really begins. It all comes back to Kissinger, does it not? But let's speak a bit about the history and how kind of this modern attempt to divide the region came to be during that period after the 1973 Arab-Israeli War.
Right. So, yeah, that's one of the things that my piece was trying to do, was to think historically about this, not just in terms of Lebanon or Syria. I've written elsewhere about Lebanon and about Israel's wars in Lebanon. But to think, about US policy in the region and the way that from the 1970s onwards, and especially after the 73 Arab-Israeli War, the Yom Kippur War, the Ramadan War, and the oil shock, the oil crisis of 73, the way that successive US administrations tried to devise a new kind of regional policy that was very much about splitting the region in two. I call it in the piece kind of thinking about the region like a diptych of two distinct parts. On the one hand, trying to secure Israeli security through normalization, what Kissinger called step-by-step diplomacy, working with governments in Cairo, in Damascus, in Beirut, in Amman, to try to secure normalization with Israel and to try to sidestep the Palestinian question and the Palestinian political actors, and to try to kind of really suspend the question of Palestinian statehood. And very much linked to that, trying to neutralize the potential threat of another oil shock coming from the Gulf states. So effectively, not to put too fine a point on it, kind of buying off the Gulf states, buying off Gulf capitals, Riyadh, but also other states like Qatar, like Kuwait, like Bahrain, by providing military assistance, by selling weaponry, by training their security forces and their armies, and by trying to provide a kind of security blanket. And in that way, to guarantee that they wouldn't ever again use the oil weapon, as it was called in the 70s, to try to put pressure on Israel and on the US to find some kind of
would you say that strategy was successful? Because we're seeing Iran throttle the strait, obviously, and use the oil weapon, as the United States would put it, to their advantage. But the Gulf states largely have been brought under the United States' umbrella via security guarantees, but we are seeing the limits of that. And perhaps we can talk more about how the Gulf states are going to be responding to this chaotic and destructive war that's already costing them billions and billions of dollars.
Right. I mean, it's in some ways it has been successful by Washington's terms, in terms of kind of, at the very least, kind of, for several decades neutralizing the potential of an oil threat. It's secured some measure of normalization over the course of the 70s and 80s and 2000s. The Camp David Accords with Egypt. More latterly, of course, the Abraham Accords, in 2020, the Trump administration. But it was always a very fragile, one of the things I try to say is it was always a very fragile, very precarious kind of balance. This attempt to kind of split the region, was always an artificial separation. And there was always, of course, under running it, the threat that the Gulf states, or that Iran, the other states in the Gulf, could use oil as a weapon. That happened in the 80s to an extent. I mean, in some ways, the current Iranian blockade of the Strait of Hormuz was foreshadowed in the Iran-Iraq conflict. Washington, from the mid-80s onwards, was backing Saddam Hussein. Let us not forget that, till he invaded Kuwait. But Iran kind of very effectively at that point used the so-called tanker wars to put pressure on Baghdad and to shut off Iraqi oil exports and put pressure on the Iraqi economy. So there are some kind of precedents here that suggest that this is always a kind of fragile balance that the US was trying to broker. And we're now seeing the consequences play out, kind of the inherent kind of incoherence of that policy really being drawn out by the war at the moment, and the ways that Iran is trying to use its leverage in this kind of very asymmetrical conflict with Israel and with the US.
However, the consistency that is throughout all of this is, even when you go to the Carter administration, Carter gets credit later in his life for speaking empathetically about the Palestinian cause. But even his presidency was a continuation of a project of sidestepping Palestinian sovereignty. Right.
He talks about his desire to see a Palestinian homeland, but the Camp David Accords, infamously don't talk about a Palestinian state. It's just another instance of U.S. administration kind of avoiding any kind of talk of Palestinian sovereignty and Palestinian statehood and Palestinian self-determination, and using terms like self-governing authority to kind of talk about a kind of zombie sovereignty that we really see embodied in the Oslo Accords after 1993, and then in the kind of Trump and Kushner plans after 2020. This kind of, I call it a mutilated kind of sovereignty. No real control over your borders, no control over your airspace, over your security, no contiguous territory, and this idea of kind of a governing authority, not a state.
And then this war here, the Abraham Accords, that effort was pursued across Trump 1.0, then Biden, and now today. You see how, and bringing up Carter in your piece too, like how consistent these foreign policy objectives are across administrations, and like how little divergence there is, except towards hawkishness, at least in this instance. Like, I would love if we had consistency from Obama's second term to Trump's first term, for example, but Trump came in and ripped up the JCPOA. But do you see this war as Trump's kind of impatience showing through in his ability, or in his fixation on trying to bring the Gulf states under the Israeli umbrella via the Abraham Accords? And I shouldn't just include Trump here, of course, because Netanyahu's prominently featured in your piece, and we know what his objectives are.
Right. I mean, I think one of the, weirdly, perhaps the one U.S. administration that moved away from this to an extent was the George Bush the elder. During the Madrid process, it sounds strange saying this on the majority report, but kind of you had a Republican president and a Secretary of State who were speaking to AIPAC and to other kind of, and to Israeli policymakers in a way that seems unimaginable now, calling on them to kind of come to the table, calling on them to stop settlements, putting kind of financial pressures on them to stop settlements. But even there, the continuity, the thread was that, again, the Bush administration, really saw the Palestinians as having to take the first step towards peace. Rashid Khalidi writes very eloquently about this. And again, being worried about talking about statehood or stopping short of speaking of Palestinian statehood. Now, in terms of the Abraham Accords, I think there was, on the part, I think, both of the Trump administration and the White House, and it seems Netanyahu as well, this sense that in some ways this would be a way of unlocking reluctance on the part of some of the Gulf states to come into the Abraham Accords. That kind of by breaking Iran's power, by breaking the axis of resistance, they could bring the Gulf states on board. So you had this kind of first part of the Abraham Accords coming on stream in 2020. Bahrain, the UAE, but Saudi Arabia, in some ways, is the jewel in the crown, and it was maybe coming close to a security arrangement with Israel and with the US in the lead up to 7th of October. Of course, that fell apart, and so Saudi Arabia, especially, kind of remains outside the Abraham Accords, but it's not the only one. Now, whether those hopes are kind of well-founded, I'm not sure. Clearly, there's been talk in the last couple of days of MBS. The White House has been briefing the MBS, the Saudi Crown Prince, has been on the phone to Trump asking him to, send ground forces into Iran. Of course, MBS has got a track record himself of kind of, interventionism and misadventures in Yemen. Whether that's true or not, I wouldn't be able to say, but it's certainly the case that kind of the Gulf states are certainly angry with Washington and are worried about the lack of protection coming from Washington and the lack of security guarantees. They're at the front line. They've been exposed to the drones and to the missiles coming from Iran, and they're feeling that quite acutely, I think, in the last few weeks.
So we can't judge the sincerity of Mohammed bin Salman saying send in ground troops, right? Because he's trying to appeal to Trump in whatever ways that he can. But in terms of like overestimating the Gulf states' desire for war here, you wouldn't know that if you listened to Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, who's doing monologues about how it's the Gulf state lobby that's dragging the U.S. into this war. Conveniently, she also did a monologue about how it was Jeffrey Epstein's Russia ties that need to be focused on in its influence of Trump. It feels like we're leaving out this very significant country in the Middle East that is dragging us all to hell. So, I mean, if you could just speak a bit about that perception, because the damage that these Gulf states, we touched on it earlier, but that they're absorbing is significant. And I can't imagine that they want this conflict to continue.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand, clearly, they do perceive Iran and the Islamic Republic as an existential threat. There's been a diplomatic rapprochement in recent years between Riyadh, between Saudi Arabia and Tehran. But that notwithstanding, I mean, there is a history of kind of animosity and antagonism, of suspicion, going back to the 70s and 80s. But at the same time, I don't think they wanted to be dragged into this war. And I think there is a real kind of sense of anxiety about the war and about what this means for their future, not just in terms of energy, but also for a state like Dubai that tries to project this image as a haven of tranquility, as a kind of safe place for expats and for crime lords and for all kinds of kind of vagabonds. There is a sense that the war has kind of really hit that image. You see it in the kinds of social media output that's been there since the first days of the war, kind of really trying to reassure people that Dubai remains a safe place for expats to go and to kind of make their living. So there's a real sense of frustration. And I think to come back to your question, Netanyahu, there's a quote in my piece that Netanyahu kind of, I think, told Fox News that he foresaw many treaties to come. And I think maybe he was talking about the Gulf states, but also about the kind of pressure, the kind of military pressure that he and Washington could bring to bear on Beirut and on Damascus. But I think, here I'm going with reporting of, people who know more about Israeli politics than I do. Somebody like Ruth Margalit in the New Yorker, for example, who has kind of, pointed out that, the Gulf states are not necessarily quite so keen to kind of join the Abraham Accords, precisely because of the ways in which Netanyahu and Trump have kind of unleashed this regional war, and again have exposed them to attacks from Iran.
Well,
yeah.
China's got to be pretty thrilled. Just sit back and watch your opponent punch themselves in the face. Andrew Arsan, professor of Arab and Global History at the University of Cambridge. You can read his latest piece in Equator entitled "Tearing Up the Map: Netanyahu's War to Remake the Middle East." Andrew, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Quick break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Ed Zitron to give us an update on the latest lies coming out of AI and how far along they are with things like database construction as they try to get investment. Be right back. We are back, and we are joined now by Ed Zitron, friend of the show, publisher of the Where's Your Ed At newsletter, and host of the Better Offline podcast. Ed, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
What's up?
Not much.
Drive time.
So, you on your newsletter that everyone should be checking out, the Where's Your Ed At newsletter, have a new piece about how the AI industry is lying to us. Nothing new, but what's interesting is how they are lying, and they appear to be lying about the capacity of these data centers, which is really important because right now across the U.S., there's like this grassroots outrage about construction of data centers in different areas of the country. So how is the AI industry lying about this, and why?
So you've probably heard all sorts of announcements of like gigawatt data centers, 100 megawatt data centers, all this. So based on my analysis, it appears that only about 3 gigawatts of actual capacity got brought online last year in America, which sounds like a lot. But there's over somewhere between 190 and 240 gigawatts of planned capacity worldwide. A great deal of that is in America. A lot of that's actually like Northern Virginia, Southern Virginia, Columbus, Ohio. The first new thing in Ohio in 100 years. A lot of people are going to love that.
Can I just say, when you say Virginia, Mark Warner, senator from Virginia, called AOC and Bernie's AI data center moratorium bill like really stupid or idiotic or something like that. Very, very harsh words from a Democrat to other Democrats. Might have something to do with it.
It's shocking to hear a Democrat who's growth obsessed. But anywho, Sightline Climate also found that despite there being 16 gigawatts worth of data center capacity that's meant to come online this year worldwide, only 5 gigawatts is in construction, which could mean everything from a single steel beam to a near complete data center. So to give some context, NVIDIA sold about $62 billion in its data center segment last year, which is GPUs and the associated gear with them. At the current rate of installation, we are running about 6 months for a quarter worth of data center sales from NVIDIA going online. Every 6 months takes a quarter to bring that online. This is a data center package that gets upgraded every year. So right now, it's taking so long for these things to get built. And I went and looked into all of the major constructions, all of the big ones. Fermi America is a great one, 11 gigawatt thing out in Amarillo, Texas. Turns out that it's just on pause. Turns out they didn't have the permitting or the funding. Just not happening. Stargate Abilene, not going to get done this year, may not get next. Only 2 buildings out of 8. The story they want you to believe is that all of this is inevitable, when in reality, of the 190 to 240 gigawatts of planned data centers, 5 gigawatts are actually being constructed. And I actually think it's way less based on everything I've seen. For the most part, I've struggled to find a data center above 10 megawatts that's actually completed. Now, I think a lot of that capacity coming online was smaller data centers dotted around the country. I mean, 310 megawatt data centers equals 3,000. There you go. Simple maths. I'm not that smart. But they're talking in terms of hundreds of gigawatts. They're talking in terms of all of this stuff. At this point, I don't know if we're going to be able to install last year's GPUs before the year 2028. So the largest company on the stock market, NVIDIA, is selling gigawatts and gigawatts of chips that are going to take years to actually digest, which brings me to the question of why we're still selling them? Why would people still buying them? What's happening with these data centers? And I think it's going to turn out that most of these data centers are just vaporware. They're construction slush funds. They are tax abatements, 3 tax abatements in a trench coat. And it's very strange because the story that local governors will tell you is data centers, they bring a bunch of jobs. What data centers actually do is they bring a lot of jobs into the state from outside the state. The economic boost is temporary, and it's brought by people that do not live there. For the most part, data centers have very small teams when they come online, whenever that will be. And on top of all of this, there is a real civic risk to these data centers above and beyond the environmental problems. Find the New Jersey data center has a vague humming sound coming from it that people have been complaining about. And that's the fact that if these projects get mothballed, if they just run out of money, which is very likely, all that's going to be left is this construction field full of crap that probably never gets cleaned up. It's going to be a bunch of promises to local authorities that things are going to happen, things that never get built, and a bunch of people, construction workers that were feeding money into the economy, who will leave. It's happened in Amarillo, and it's going to happen elsewhere.
Well, then it begs the question, what does that do to the economy that is completely right now oversaturated or over-leveraged when it comes to AI? And Trump's big bet on the economy is AI. If this is as overvalued as you say, and that like the capacity just is not there, but but chips are continuing to be bought, is like, when is the market gonna figure that out?
So the market right now feels a tidge manipulated. I feel like just like 15 minutes before market, I was like, Iran has given up. It's beautiful. We've no more Iran. They've joined America. They're a new state. And then the market goes up, and then Iran comes out and says, no, that's not true at all. And market goes down. But putting all that aside, the actual economic effects of AI are very small. Based on data from the Department of Commerce, I think it's like there was only about $28 billion worth of construction in data centers in 2025. It's very, very small compared to how many actual GPUs were sold. Outside of hardware manufacturers like NVIDIA or SanDisk, who does the hard drives and such, and the solid state hard drives, or Micron as well, like the RAM manufacturers like SK Hynix and Samsung. Outside of them, AI companies are not making much money. Anthropic, they had to reveal this in the Department of Defense lawsuit to try and get that supply chain risk designation removed. They had to admit they've only made $5 billion in their entire lifetime, and they spent $10 billion on compute. The biggest economic effect here is NVIDIA, and after that, there's very little else. The data center projects, I think, are just slowing to a crawl because construction is slow and expensive, and most of these things don't appear properly capitalized. So what we are seeing is a mirage economy. We are seeing something that is a hypothetical built on another hypothetical, the ultimate speculative economy. And the problem with that is at some point you run out of things to speculate on, and also somebody's going to need a real dollar. The reason I pick on Fermi America and Amarillo is because when the money wasn't there, the construction workers just got dumped. When you start seeing that happen, that's how you know the party's over. AI, they want it to be a big thing because they run out of hypergrowth ideas. They don't have the next big thing. They haven't had one for a while. So they need AI to be big. But the problem is that it's actually quite hard to make anything good happen from AI. The services all lose money, and even the money they make is quite small. I have suspicions over the revenue with OpenAI and Anthropic anyway, but everyone wants this to be a thing so badly because once they accept it isn't, they have to accept that the tech industry has hit a wall and hit one quite a few years ago.
Yeah.
And instead, they've decided to spin up these fucking data centers for no goddamn reason. For AI demand that does not exist. The demand is not there. The biggest consumer of compute is OpenAI, followed by Anthropic, followed by hyperscalers that are just running their own services that people don't like.
Can you explain what hyperscalers means? Because there's another section of, no, it's okay, of your piece where you're basically talking about how these hyperscalers are forcing their employees to integrate AI, and the employees and the customers hate it.
So a hyperscaler refers to a hyperscale company like Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, or Google. Oracle is kind of on the borderline there. We could talk about Oracle. They're one of my favorite things to make fun of. But nevertheless, so the story there was companies like Meta and Microsoft are saying, like, you have to use generative AI. You have to use LLM code, and you need to also ship code faster than you've ever shipped it before. This is already creating situations where Amazon lost hundreds of thousands of orders because a part of the website went down. Amazon Web Services went down as well as a result of someone using AI code. You have people in hyperscale companies, I can't say specifically which, where you have non-technical people, like designers, even writers in some cases, shipping code that eventually makes it into the product itself. This may seem magical. Doesn't mean the code's good. You've got some poor asshole, some software engineer who has to look over this slop code and go, is this good? Is this okay? But I also have all my own work, so it looks fine. And things are already breaking. You had a massive incident at Meta recently because some dickwad used OpenClaw, which is a whole thing. If you hear someone say OpenClaw, just dial 911. They've probably committed some kind of crime. But OpenClaw is just this insane thing where people buy Mac Minis and spin up a bunch of useless LLM services and spend hundreds of dollars a day. Anyway, somebody did that at Meta and leaked a bunch of sensitive data that shouldn't have been out there. That's good. We love that. So I think we're approaching a point where these services are going to start to degrade. And we're kind of already seeing the signs they are. And I think as more of this slop code gets pushed in by people that can write software, that people that can kind of write software, and the people that can't write software, you're just going to have this situation where reams of code are being written and shipped without anyone reading them, and things are going to start breaking. And when things start breaking at scale, they're quite hard to fix, especially when you keep laying people off. So you have mountains of code that no one's reading. You're laying people off. So the people that might have actually prodded the LLM so you could see why they did it. Instead, you've got a bunch of code written by a machine with no intention, and that whole code is being shipped, and the people that ship that code have been fired. You've got smaller teams looking at more code. What do you think is going to happen? It's going to get built poorly. It's all going to fall apart. It's already falling apart. And it's going to be very funny for those of us who critique it, but it's also going to be bad for the users of the service. I worry about how many of these companies have very sensitive data about people, credit cards, social security numbers, private emails, that kind of thing. People will say I'm being alarmist, but Amazon's losing orders because of AI coding tools.
Well, why would you be? I mean, Ed, like we are in the midst of seeing this lawsuit over Doge. They very likely stole social security numbers, sensitive bank information, credit card information, and threw it into Grok. I mean, like these are companies that are explicitly, well, they're trying to outrace China because American capitalists have intellectual property over AI, but they're stealing everybody else's intellectual property in the process, which, I mean, I'm not an IP.
The Doge thing was separate, though. The Doge thing was they took the data and just fed it into Grok and were like, what are the most based social security numbers?
Yeah.
And bullshit like that. What I'm talking about is the major software companies are building or have to have many, many coding people who are just letting the code be written by the machines. Codes do not have, that code is written by LLMs that do not think, do not have intention. So you just have this unintentional code slop, and they're like, yep, looks fine. Right. Nothing's broken yet, it's fine. Which means that when you're working with sensitive systems that may have social security numbers, well, things are just going to start breaking, and that stuff leaks. We already have data breaches before this. It's terrifying.
Yes, I'm just trying to. I get what you're saying. Like the fast and loose nature of the move fast and break things means open the safe and stealing all of your sensitive information if necessary, because they're all racing one another as well.
Or just leaving the door open.
That too.
The China thing is so funny as well because it's like the pant shitting competition. Like, wow, who could waste the most money? Who can make the machine that's the least popular? Who can violate the most copyrights? Who can make a video that makes Goofy say, gosh, I'll fuck anything that moves, like in Blue Velvet? Who is going to do, like, what's the next big thing that we can do that nobody likes? Which company will be the next to lose billions of dollars? Like, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? Oh, AI is replacing coders. No, it's not. It just factually isn't. You may have people writing all their code with LLMs. That doesn't mean they're being replaced. People are being laid off. It's not because of AI. It's because these companies overhired and they are spending so much on AI that they need to save money by firing people. Just feels apocalyptic at times. And I think China is absolutely goading America with this. I think that they just go like, ooh, we're going to, well, I mean, they've already got the latest generation GPUs. Ooh, what they're going to do with that? Ooh, the big scary China's gonna Xi Jinping's gonna come. Ooh, he's gonna come in the computer and he's gonna steal your models. Ooh, to what end? To what end? Minimax, big Chinese AI company, they made tens of millions of dollars of revenue last year and lost over 200 million. When you actually look at the economics and you actually look at the outputs, all of this is just kind of shit.
Yeah, right. And I mean, the China piece, can you expand on that a bit more? Just because there is obviously more collaboration than is being advertised for nationalist ends here in the United States.
Well, it's weird because, so to be clear, I cannot tell you for sure, but the latest generation GPUs keep making it to China. The latest one was Supermicro, which is one of the major AI server builders, major NVIDIA partner. There was a picture of Wally Liao, who was one of the guys who was arrested, like 2 guys away from Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA. But of course, nobody's asked NVIDIA about it. No one's got a comment. People have talked to Jensen Huang since and just nothing. Anyway, Supermicro shipped at least $500 million worth of GPUs, the latest generation, to China, like taking serial numbers off with hair dryers. Kind of sick. Kind of just like, finally, some real crime. But before that, there was this NeoClouds, just an AI compute company in Singapore called Megaspeed. And Bloomberg did this story last year about them. Now, again, can't say anything for sure, but Megaspeed had an investor presentation that was saying we're building data centers here, here, and here, and we just have a secret one up here in a unnamed place. Then there's a completely different company based in China with an identical investor deck saying, yeah, that was in Beijing. This company also mysteriously had missing GPUs. It was not clear where they were going, and they've definitely seems like some of them have made it to China. And also there was a picture of the CEO with Jensen Huang of NVIDIA. So it's very obvious that something is happening that gets these GPUs to China. Now, I truly don't know whether Jensen Huang knows. I would be a fool to make a statement that would say for sure. But it's a little bit suspicious. Little bit suspicious that this keeps happening. It's a little bit suspicious that NVIDIA declaratively denies it every time, and then hundreds of millions of dollars of these fucking things get over there. I think it's going to turn out that someone knew. I don't know who knew. Who knows? Who could possibly be the person at NVIDIA that would know these were getting there? I just also think it's very unlikely that no one had any idea they were in China. These things do phone home. Like, it's very obvious that they do. And I think, I don't know, I truly don't know how it ends, but it sure looks like somebody at NVIDIA must know. And if that's the case, that is criminal. But I also think that this whole thing with China is just an imaginary fight.
Yes.
It's
like the space race. Oh. Yeah, I mean, it's just an excuse for more kind of investment or giveaways to corporations using the guise of national security to overinflate a sector, as has been done. I mean, gosh, for weapons, for different kind of industrial policy for quite a while, for obviously the space race. This feels like an attempt to recreate that, but what's coming out of it is so impractical and actually detrimental to the American public via the labor market. Like, I mean, you've touched on it, but what are we looking at right now with the ramifications for all of these people that are going to be laid off? And of course, they're overselling the ability of AI to replace them, but it doesn't mean that the shock isn't going to be this intense.
But the thing is, AI driven, as in like AI replacing layoffs, are not happening at scale. You have contractors, you have art directors, translators, transcribers who are Brian Merchant of Bloody in the Machine, pardon me, does a great job covering this. But at scale, like these massive companies like Block, they are not replacing people with AI. In every example of someone claiming they do, like Klarna, for example, they fired a bunch of people saying they could replace customer service with AI and then had to rehire people. Mm-hmm. It's just like every single one of these stories is just a falsehood, just an utter lie. So the ramifications will be layoffs that were going to happen are going to happen. I've been saying for years that layoffs are going to happen in big tech because AI costs so much money that they have to lay people off. Whether or not I can replace them or not is irrelevant. So what's going to happen is the pressure on people at these companies, the pressure internally, is only ratcheting up. I've already heard this is happening in Microsoft. Microsoft, I actually heard, is doing token austerity. You're being encouraged to use different models and not burn as much money. very nasty, very bad. Doesn't sound good to me. But nevertheless, workers are just going to get treated even more like shit as a result of these layoffs. But AI is not the reason. Business idiots are. They're assholes at the top. And I think by the end of this, one of these hyperscalers is going to lose their head. I think we seriously are looking at the end of Oracle. I think Larry Ellison could be reduced to rubble, and I'm quite serious. I think Satya Nadella gets fired by the end of this. I think that Sam Altman tries to blame a woman called Fujisimo, who became the CEO of applications at OpenAI. Of course, a woman takes the fall for a man's fuck-ups. Nice, very nice, Sammy. I think that we're going to all look back on this with an insufficient amount of shame. I think that there is so many people are going to need to feel ashamed here, because so many of these actions have been taken based on mythology and ghost stories. The idea that we need to do this to stop China from doing what? Generating sexier Garfields, generating more copyright violations. Like, what are we stopping China from doing? They've got the Blackwell GPUs now. Now what? What has China done with them? What are we so scared of? What are we so scared of? Like, what is it that China's doing that's so scary? Oh, no, well, China's distilling models. Oh.
Well, it's interesting, Ed, and we can wrap after this, because I'm seeing some frustration even. We have it on our sound sheet. We may get to it later, but AOC and Bernie's bill to put a moratorium on the construction of these data centers. Bernie Sanders here in the United States seems to have kind of bought into the idea that AI is this existential threat to humanity. I've seen that perhaps isn't the best. Some people being critical, skeptical of that angle, because it just kind of reinforces what the AI investor class wants people to think, is that this is so powerful. What's your assessment of his framing on this?
I like Bernie, but the video he did talking to Claude was one of the most embarrassing things I've seen in my life. Someone on Blue Sky posted that it was like that scene from Simpsons where Marge went, "Homer, look, it's that bird you like arguing with." I think that Ewan Higgins actually had a really good point about this, that Bernie keeps framing AI in the terms that they want it to, that the industry wants it to. It's this ultra powerful thing we should stop before it gets too powerful. The data centers, they have plenty of compute. The whole, if we get more compute, it'll be more powerful thing is just kind of a myth at this point. It gets better at benchmarks that are rigged. I think a data center moratorium is unrealistic. Like, sure, if they do it, but like, it will never go anywhere. It's just a big, stupid package that if they actually wanted to stop these things, they would create something more. I know this sounds centrist, but it isn't. This is a genuine thing. The way to stop these data centers is to slow them down. All of them are funded by debt and they're interest-only payments until they are fully constructed. Slow them down. Force an environmental review on every single global national data center.
That is very anti-abundance of you.
Fuck the abundance people. I'm sick and fucking tired of it. Ezra fucking Klein needs to stop talking about AI. He sounds like he has a fucking concussion. Pardon me. I apparently need to call my therapist about Ezra Klein. But it's this, like, the polyamory of AI. It's just this thing of like, oh God, it's so important and we need more of it. We already have plenty. We have plenty. Well, what if it becomes AGI? What if the Grinch appears in New York City with a time bomb? Like, what if a giant bird carries me away and drops me from 5,000 feet in the air? These are all more realistic than AGI. And I think that Bernie's bought into it. I think that AI exploits ignorance and fear and jingoism, and it is perfect for imperialism. It allows the imperialists to generate big ideas that are very scary sounding to sell to people that don't think for 2 seconds. And I'm frustrated because if Bernie actually fucking listened, if AOC actually fucking listened and actually focused on the real problems, they would find the ways to actually stop this, which is to slow it down. Not because of the powerful AI might become more powerful, but because these data centers shouldn't be being built. They're not going to have good economic effects. They don't create jobs. They need to be reviewed. Throw paperwork on them. Make them go through the paperwork. If they're valid businesses, they'll survive it, but they're not. Every data center is pretty much unprofitable, especially with the debt. Slow them down, fucking stop them, but don't do so in the name of some boogeyman, AGI.
Well said. I do think, it reinforces framing that gives them way too much credit for the product that they're creating here. Ed Zitron, the newsletter is Where's Your Ed At? Obviously, and of course, the Better Offline podcast, essential works during this time. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Ed. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. With that, folks, we're going to wrap up the first part of the show, the free part. Although, one quick plug here, actually. So, you know, I was out in California, on my way, I'm at the airport. You guys know I'm popping an edible before I'm getting on my flight. I'm having a good time. What?
Better than a Xanax.
Yeah, it is better than that.
I switched from Xanax to edibles when I fly, and it's way healthier.
Having a good time, feeling good. I'm wearing my Democratic DSA merch, or it's Dream for NYC, and I posted this picture. And it like started trending because people were comparing me to that guy that wore the like indict Joe Biden or something t-shirt on the plane.
Convicted felon
Convicted
Joe Biden.
felon. And unfortunately, yes, it is like a funny comparison because this was a bit corny for me to tweet out. But like, I don't know. I was in a good mood, laughing, having a good time off my alone at the airport, and I tweeted out this picture, and people were just like losing their minds about me pretending like I thought this was some sort of revolutionary act. Like, I go on Twitter after I get off my flight, and I see today's news: Emma Vigeland's anti-billionaire sweatshirt draws online fire at airport.
Move to Cuba.
I'm like, yeah.
Has Emma landed yet?
I was in shock, okay? But then I'm trying to plug the sweatshirt because it is so comfortable. I love a good comfy travel outfit, and it's now kind of been my staple. And I'm tagging DSA, but then I'm also getting messages from them like, no, you're tagging the wrong people. I'm like, okay, great.
It's Dream for NYC.
This is way too overstimulating for the selfie, okay? So I now have, but this is for a good cause. So I now have like the actual information here, and the Dream team reached out to me, and I wanted to read this because this is from the Don't Rank Evil Andrew for Mayor Dream campaign. We can take my stupid face off the screen now.
It was Don't Rank Evil Andrew, but first it was Don't Rank Eric Adams. And then it was Don't Rank Eric or Andrew, and then it was Don't Rank Evil Andrew. So
right.
It worked through 3 different iterations.
It's resilient as an acronym. So this is the information on this. If you guys like that sweatshirt, you know, or if you hate it, like so many people seem to,
and want to buy it and burn it.
Yeah.
For a TikTok video.
You show them. So this is an email I got from the Dream team. Last year, we created the Don't Rank Evil Andrew for Mayor Dream campaign. Our goal was to turn anti-Cuomo ranked choice strategy into common sense with a culture-first strategy that would break out of the political bubble. Our Don't Rank Cuomo shirts became a defining part of the race, doing something so much political comms fails at, looking good. Agreed, and I just like it that it's really cozy. So after the election, we turned our focus to the next stage of the fight, making Kathy Hochul tax the rich in New York to fund the affordability agenda we voted for. That includes merch like this. It's union printed and made in the USA, so it costs a little more than the kinds of horrible quality sweatshop material basically every right-wing product uses, but it's worth it. All proceeds go to funding the campaign to tax the rich, the same way a candidate's merch funds their election campaign. Ours funds our policy campaign. It's how we can pay for our amazing designers and filmmakers and run a massive physical ad campaign from New York City to Albany that we know is freaking the governor out. If you want to support the fight and get one, the link is shop.dreamfornyc.com, shop.dreamfornyc.com. And get more people talking about socialism. We will put a link down below. I got this one for free because they were they were being nice to us.
I got one too. Just saying. Me too.
Yeah. Did you go viral?
But no, I didn't.
Because
go viral.
some incel intern decided to pump me to the top of the algorithm. This was me yesterday on the flight.
Looking for trouble.
You think that shirt was union made?
Who wore it better?
Oh, God. Bipartisanship in America. So, there we go. With that, Matt, what's happening with your shows?
Yeah, I don't know where the rest of our Thursday crew is, but on Left Reckoning on Tuesday, we had Maximilian Alvarez on to update us on the East Palestine poisoning and just the decisions made to, for instance, set all that stuff on fire instead of cleaning it up, which was a decision I found out that was taken because it takes a little bit long to clean stuff up. Why clean it up when you can just light it on fire and poison the local community? So check that out. Max is great, and we'll have a Sunday show for our patrons on Sunday and a Jacobin show tomorrow at 3:00 Eastern time.
Check it out, folks. I also should say I was on a few shows while I was out in LA. You can check out my episode of Pod Save America. Also, Higher Learning with Rachel Lindsay and Van Lathan. Got to meet Rachel in person this time. Tell her how cool she was on The Bachelorette. Also, of course, check out the Bituation Room, as I mentioned earlier. What's up, Matt Binder? What's happening on your shows?
Hey, how are you? It's Mets opening day. Right?
Oh, yeah, it is. Gosh, I can't believe it's almost April now.
Yeah. So tonight, Leftist Mafia, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, at youtube.com/Matt Binder.
All right, check it out. And we will have Brandon Sutton at some point, but check out the discourse, all that good stuff. We will see you in the funhouse.